Welcome to Moreauknows. Today we're going to be learning about the essential standard Bio 1.2.1, and we're going to be explaining how homeostasis is maintained within a cell. But before we can do that, we really need to talk about the plasma membrane or cellular membrane. And so we need to figure out what actually determines what can enter or leave a cell. And so that is going to have a lot to do with the cell membrane, or the plasma membrane, or the phospholipid bilayer. Those are all going to be the same thing in this podcast. When I'm talking about a bilayer, I'm talking about a phospholipid. And so phospholipid is actually this thing right down here. So it actually has a charged head, so we call that a polar head, and a non-charged tail. And so this kind of is unique to where we can put these in different arrangements to actually hold things inside them. And so you might be wondering why I have a picture of this musk ox. Well, that's because these musk ox are always looking for a fight. So I like to think that they have a very large charged head. Okay? And when they fight, they usually keep all of the baby musk ox in the center, and then they stick their heads out. And this is what we see when we look at a plasma membrane. So here, all of the heads are on the outside, and the tails are on the inside. And so if you think of a musk ox, next time you'll think of the heads being on the outside, protecting what's on the inside, which would be the baby musk ox. And so this cell membrane is actually what allows our cells to enter and things to enter and leave the cell. And so we need to figure out how that happens. And so we have this thing called selective permeability. And selective permeability means that it selects for only certain things to move through the cell membrane or the cell wall. So today we're going to be talking about the cell membrane and why it's considered to be a fluid mosaic model. The cell membrane is going to be consisted of phospholipids, and these phospholipids, just like I was saying before, are amphithetic, and what that means is that there's one side that's charged and one side that's no charge, and that's the polar heads and non-polar tails, and they will allow for small things to move in and out, and also uncharged things to move in and out. The cell membrane also has proteins, and so proteins are really important because if molecules are not small and uncharged, they need to be transported in through the proteins. And so we can have things like charged particles or large particles moved in. And there's also on the plasma membrane a bunch of cholesterol, glycoproteins, and glycolipids, which aren't going to be important for honors biology. The cell wall is going to be mainly there for structure in plant cells, but it also has its own selective permeability as well. So this cell membrane is actually going to be a fluid mosaic model. And so to think of what this means is that the molecules that are inside this need to be fluid, meaning that they are kind of going to move around however they need to, kind of unidirectional, and if they ever stop, it really won't become a membrane anymore. And so the reason it's a mosaic, a fluid mosaic model, is because it's got different things embedded into the membrane. And so for this, we have, let me get a color you can see, we have these things right here, which are our phospholipids, which creates a bilayer, which bilayer means two. So we actually have one that's on either side. and that's going to keep the water out. The next thing that we have are these big blue things here, which are called proteins, and these are actually going to channel molecules to move through them to move through the plasma membrane if they are bigger or charged or going against a concentration gradient, which you'll learn about in the next video. Now there is a cytoskeleton that's around here, that's all of this right here, and just kind of get your head around things. There is a cytoplasm. Now cytoplasm is inside the cell, and so it's the fluid that everything sits inside the cell. So outside of the cell we have this extracellular fluid, and extracellular means outside the cell, and so when molecules want to move through here, they need to go and pass through the plasma membrane from outside to inside the cell, or the opposite way as well. So let's look more at these phospholipids. So these phospholipids have a hydrophobic tail. So I'm going to write that here. Hydrophobic. And so hydrophobic means that they do not like water. And so when we're thinking of these being in a cytoplasm or extracellular space, the water fearing, the phobic part, the phobia, is going to be on the inside of the membrane, where the water loving or the hydrophilic the hydrophilic, philic meaning loving, phobic meaning afraid, this end is going to be charged, and this side's going to be non-polar or non-charged. Okay, and this is going to be made up of the lipids, and this side is going to be made of a phosphate group, and so that's why we have a phospholipids, because it's a phosphate group attached to a lipids. And so when molecules want to move into the cell, they need to pass through this phospholipid membrane. So when I breathe in, I'm actually breathing in oxygen, and that's actually going to move in through my cells and into the plasma membrane. So when I breathe in, it's going into my lungs, moving into the alveoli, and absorbing into my bloodstream to go to other cells. And so when I breathe out carbon dioxide, I'm actually breathing out carbon dioxide is diffusing through this plasma membrane. This is how I exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. The last thing is these proteins that will allow for molecules that are not soluble or not lipid soluble to get in. So if they're lipid soluble or if they're really, really small, they can just kind of pass through. Well, if they're too big, they're lipid insoluble, they need to pass through a channel. And so this is the channel that they're going to pass through. And the protein will kind of open up, it'll rest in the middle, it'll close, and spit it out the other end. And so here we have a channel. So this is for facilitated diffusion, and this is actually just going to diffuse right across through the channel. The channel is always going to be open. And there are also channels for water molecules. Because water is polar, it will not go through the lipid bilayer. Okay? And this is a aquaporin, and aquaporin kind of looks like this right here, or does look like this, and that's what is resembled right there in this graphic. Thank you for watching Moreauknows. Now you do.